You've seen this scene 100 times. A hulking caveman grunts, drags his mate by the hair, club over one shoulder, dumb and dangerous. Now picture the real campsite, same species. 40,000 years ago, in a river valley that's now Sungir, Russia, two bodies lie buried head to head, each one covered in 3,000 carved ivory beads, sewn one by one into their clothes. Archaeologists estimate that took 10,000 hours of skilled labor. Not a grunt in sight. Just grief, ritual, and serious craftsmanship. In 1856, scientists found a bent arthritic skeleton and decided primitive on the spot. One bad guess became the blueprint for a century of movies. So what does the real science say once you stop guessing and start digging? Let's start with the thing Hollywood gets most wrong: talking. Movies love the grunt, but the hyoid bone, the tiny bone that lets us form words, shows up in Neanderthals looking just like ours. Cave walls back it up. 30,000-year-old paintings at Chauvet show planning, symbolism, memory of animals painted from imagination, not copying. You don't paint a running lion from memory with grunts alone. That takes language, culture, and a shared story passed down. Here's the aphorism worth remembering: silence isn't stupidity. It's just what movies assume when they don't want to write dialogue. So, the mumbling caveman? Complete fiction. Real early humans spoke, planned, and told stories around that same fire you're picturing right now. In 2018, archaeologists opened a 9,000-year-old grave in Wilamaya Patjxa, Peru, buried beside the body. A full big game hunting toolkit. The skeleton belonged to a woman. Statistical analysis of dozens of burial sites suggests early female hunters were common, not rare exceptions. Picture a relay team instead of one lone brute. Hunting big game took coordinated groups, trackers, throwers, butchers. Everyone had a role. That's the kitchen table version. A hunt worked like a potluck, not a one-man show. Everybody brought a skill, or nobody ate. So the caveman dragging a woman by the hair? Reverse it. She was just as likely holding the spear that fed the whole camp. Great advantage here. Shared labor meant shared survival. Fatal flaw in the myth: it erased half the workforce from the whole story. Movies also love the lone survivor. One caveman against the wilderness. Real Paleolithic life ran on something else entirely. Networks. Quick thing before we keep going. If outdated history myths bug you as much as they bug us, hit subscribe. There's more of this coming. Back to those networks. Shell beads found 600 kilometers from any coastline show up in inland Ice Age camps. Traded hand to hand. That's not survival of the loner. That's survival of the connected. Isolated groups didn't last. Trading, talking groups did. Here's the aphorism: a lone caveman is a dead caveman. Connection wasn't a nice extra, it was the whole survival plan. So what about intelligence? Movies love calling early humans dim. The Neanderthal brain, on average, was as large as ours, sometimes bigger. At Shanidar Cave in Iraq, one man survived blind in one eye, missing an arm for years, clearly cared for by his group. A blind, one-armed hunter doesn't survive an Ice Age winter alone. Someone fed him, sheltered him, and thought that mattered. So the dim-witted brute swinging a club at nothing, swap it for a species capable of long-term compassion. That's the real twist. Now, the tools. Movies hand cavemen one blunt club and call it a day. Real toolkits looked more like a Swiss Army knife. Sewing needles carved from bone, some barely a millimeter wide. Mean early humans were tailoring fitted clothing, not draping loose fur. Fitted clothes plus woven rope, evidence found twisted into fibers at Ohalo, meant nets, snares, and slings way beyond one wooden club. And then there's the boat. To reach Australia 65,000 years ago, someone had to cross open ocean, out of sight of land. That's not a lucky accident. That's planning, construction, and nerve. No movie caveman has ever built a boat and sailed past the horizon. Great advantage here. Those seafarers reached new coastlines and new prey. Fatal flaw in the Hollywood version. It never lets them leave the cave. So next time a movie caveman can barely operate a rock, remember, his real counterpart sailed farther than most sailors dare today. One more myth: the nasty, brutish short life. Movies show every early human dying by 30. The data tells a messier story. Yes, infant mortality was brutal, and injuries were common, but plenty of skeletons show people living well into their 50s and 60s. That matters because grandparents changed everything. Extra caregivers meant more kids survived, more skills passed down, more stories kept alive. Here's the kitchen table version. An elder in camp worked like a backup hard drive, storing knowledge nobody else had gotten around to learning yet. So the wrinkled elder who dies off-screen in Act 1 of a caveman movie? In real life, he might have been running the whole camp. Even care for the sick went further than survival math. Healed broken bones on ancient skeletons proves someone tended wounds for weeks or months. A shattered leg doesn't heal itself. Someone brought water, food, and warmth day after day, with zero guarantee of payback. That's not the movie Caveman's world of every man for himself. That's something closer to an early hospital ward, just with fur blankets instead of sheets. Let's talk color, because this is where movies and misinformation really collide. Hollywood habitually paints every early human with identical pale skin. Genetics tells a different story. A 2017 study in Science, led by geneticist Sarah Tishkoff, traced skin color to dozens of separate gene variants. Those variants shifted independently across populations, tuned to how much sun hit a given latitude, not to any hierarchy of worth. Skin color isn't hierarchy, it's an address. It tells you where your ancestors' bodies adapted to stand under the sun, nothing more. It's worth saying plainly, this science has been twisted for ugly purposes throughout history. That misuse was never what the data actually showed. Set that misuse aside, and the biology is almost boring. Pigment genes turning up or down like a dimmer switch, nothing more dramatic than that. So the identical monochrome cast of every prehistoric movie? Reality was as varied as humanity is today, just spread across more open land. One more myth to bury: the idea that Neanderthals were a dead-end species, wiped out because modern humans were simply better. Genetic testing shows most people outside Africa carry 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA today. They didn't vanish, they merged. So what changed? If not simple superiority, climate swings, smaller Neanderthal group sizes, and interbreeding all likely played a part together. There's no clean villain in that story. No dumb loser stumbling off a cliff. Just two closely related peoples and one absorbing the other over millennia. So let's go back to that couch, that movie. That grunting brute dragging his mate by the hair across the screen. Every detail in that scene is wrong, not simplified, not artistic license, just wrong. Built on a 100-year-old misdiagnosed skeleton and a shrug. The real people who lived through that ice age spoke, painted, hunted as teams, sailed oceans, nursed the sick, and buried their dead in beadwork. So why does the myth survive decades after the science moved on? Maybe because a grunting brute is easier to laugh at than to recognize. Recognizing them means recognizing us. Same brains, same grief, same stubborn will to keep a fire burning through a bad winter. That's the real twist Hollywood keeps missing. There was never a line between caveman and human. It was always the same story. So what does it say about us that we keep choosing the cartoon over the truth, generation after generation, film after film? Maybe the real myth was never about them. Maybe it's about how we keep needing someone to feel superior to. Next time a movie hands you a grunting, club-swinging caveman, remember Sungir's beads, Shanidar's elder, and that raft crossing an open sea.